about the research that I do and talk about sharks and tourism and all that fun stuff, because sharks are my favorite. So with that, I'm going to, oh, Kendall, can you allow me to share my screen, please?
Yeah, 1 second. Hold on, having some technical difficulties.
Oh, good. I should have asked you this at the beginning.
That's okay. Here we go. Okay. There. I went ahead and made you the co-host, so you should be able to share your screen now. Awesome. And I'm going to spotlight you for everybody.
Okay, my computer is moving very slow, so I apologize in advance if you see this just moving slow. But everyone can see my screen okay, right? Kendall, I can see you, thumbs up. Sweet, awesome. All right, so guys, the name of my talk today is To Feed or Not to Feed Sharks and Tourism. And what I'll be going over is the tourism industry. I'll start out with going into wildlife tourism, what it's all about, why people do it, and then I'll go into my own research that I did for my master's thesis, looking at the effects of tourism on nurse sharks in Belize, but more on that. So Kendall already gave me a wonderful introduction, but this is just my intro slide. For some reason, the text isn't showing, but it's okay. But again, my name is Carlee Jackson. I am the Director of Communications for an organization called Minorities in Shark Sciences. And I always talk about minorities in shark sciences for just a little bit before I get started, because it is a really awesome thing that I created with 3 other Black women in the shark science industry. And it's just really awesome because we're an organization trying to promote diversity in shark sciences, and we're trying to uplift and highlight the diverse voices that are already within the field. Because, you know, shark science, when you see Shark Week, it's a very monolithic group of people showed on Shark Week shows, just white males, and we're trying to change that in the shark world, and we've been making big strides this year. So I'll put all of the contact info for my organization at the end, and I'll also shout out my current job at Disney Conservation. I'm a research associate. I work with sea turtles, so I get the best of both worlds, sharks and sea turtles. But I work mostly on fisheries projects there. So if anyone has any questions on that, feel free to ask at the end. So I'm a shark and sea turtle biologist. Why does this work? Hello, there we go. Awesome. So I'm going to start this out by just telling you guys all about how tourism and wildlife tourism, really why it's a thing. So overall, there's just a global decline in biodiversity. We all have heard of climate change, oceans warming, we're losing lots of plants and animals due to these phenomenons. Another added stress is things like hunting and overfishing. So these are all human activities that are affecting all of the wildlife, not just the ocean, but both our terrestrial animals and marine animals as well. We're getting a lot of coral reefs declining, unfortunately, and a lot of plants and animals on land we're losing as well. So wildlife tourism, it's becoming really popular. Over the past couple years, it's just increased in popularity. And really one of those biggest reasons is everyone's trying to see the wildlife before it disappears before our eyes, which is kind of sad. But wildlife tourism is an activity that people do to go see wildlife or animals in their natural habitat in the wild. And they're trying to experience, like I said, that biodiversity before it's too late. We want to go out and see those coral reefs before they start bleaching, because they bleach really quickly. And we want to see all the beautiful fish on those coral reefs before they disappear. But the biggest thing that us scientists are trying to do is figure out how this activity is impacting wildlife and their habitats. So with this activity increasing so rapidly, like we've seen, we really need to figure out how this is affecting animals and the habitat that they live in. So going from marine wildlife or going from wildlife tourism, which just really includes all wildlife, including terrestrial, we've got marine wildlife tourism, which is specifically focused on marine activities. So this can be anything from snorkeling, scuba diving, swimming with sharks, swimming with stingrays. This picture right up here is a picture of me before I was a full-blown scientist at Stingray City, holding one of the stingrays they had in the Bahamas. This picture is of my dad snorkeling with me in Belize, and these are all different pictures from other tourism activities that I have participated in. But yeah, wildlife tourism, anything where you're in the water with the wildlife, interacting with the wildlife, or just, just watching them. There's a lot of positives and negatives to marine wildlife tourism. The biggest positive is that they support local communities. A lot of wildlife tourism, especially marine wildlife tourism, is in small countries and small little islands. So these small little islands, they have beautiful scenery around them, beautiful coral reefs, healthy coral reefs and healthy fish populations, and everyone wants to come down and see those things. So that is a very big economy for those small local communities, and they rely a lot on the revenue from these practices. Another positive is that these activities can increase awareness in tourists. So tourists going out, getting behind the aquarium glass, being thrown in the water, right in that marine wildlife habitat. This can help them learn more about the animals that they're seeing, especially if they have a good tour guide. They learn more, and from them learning more, they can learn to appreciate the environment that they're in. And hopefully they would change some of their habits to make them more environmentally friendly. And some of the negatives that we see from marine wildlife tourism is definitely damage to ecosystems. The biggest one I can think of is coral reefs. If you hit your fins with coral reefs, you're severely damaging those corals because they are living animals, and kicking them with their fins is going to make them not feel good. So damage to the ecosystems is a really big one, and also physical trauma to the target species is another negative effect. So the animals actually coming, the animals that people are seeing can be directly affected by boats. Boats is the biggest one in marine tourism. A lot of animals can get hit by boats. So going into shark tourism, coming off of marine wildlife tourism, that is another industry that's really, really, really popular. And this is because of movies like Jaws or all these other shark movies that is really making people say, oh my gosh, sharks are so scary, but we got to swim with them. Like, it's got to put it on my bucket list. And, everyone feels really cool when you're in the water with a top predator or something that's called an eating machine. So yeah, this just includes anything from snorkeling to cage diving with sharks to feeding sharks. So feeding sharks is what I focus on in my study and what I will delve into a little deeper. But shark tourism overall is probably one of the most popular tourism activities in the marine wildlife industry. So this is a map of places where you can go and swim or dive with sharks. So just places that have shark tourism. And this isn't all of them, like this is not even close to all of them, but these are just some representations and just different species that are found in some of these areas. So over here, we've got in the Caribbean Sea, in these warm waters, you can swim with whale sharks, you can swim with reef sharks, and especially nurse sharks. Down here in the Galapagos, you can swim with hammerhead sharks and whale sharks, and even some great white sharks as well. We've got more whale sharks in Mozambique you can swim with, more whale sharks over here in Thailand and the Philippines. Great white sharks are very popular to cage dive with in Australia. So this is just an example of how widespread shark tourism is just across the world, and just further emphasizing why we as scientists need to keep investigating how these practices are affecting sharks. So shark provisioning tourism is a little bit more specific in the shark tourism world. Provisioning tourism is the act of feeding or baiting the water to attract sharks to that area, or just any wildlife to an area, because with most all marine wildlife, food is a very good incentive. So with this, the shyness and avoidance behaviors that sharks naturally have is just completely reversed because there's food in the water. When there's food, the shark's going to be there. It's not really going to care that much that a human is around. It's one of the top 3 things a shark's brain tells it to do is eat. So they're definitely going to come around for that food. But with that, we get a lot of impacts on the sharks and on the humans. They could start showing aggression towards humans. Sometimes it's probably not aggression, but it could be more of like, hey, you're a human with food, or you're a human and I usually see humans with food, so are you going to give me some food? So we kind of have that negative interaction with humans that could occur. Also a decrease in health and fitness. So there's been some studies on specifically stingrays in the Cayman Islands. They are provisioned there. So people come out and they feed the stingrays there. And there's been long-term studies on how this is affecting the stingrays. They've basically seen that some of the stingrays just have a very decreased health and fitness. They're not in very good body condition. They have cuts and scars all over them. They have parasites and just horrible things. So these are definitely some of the negative effects this practice can have on sharks and rays. Another thing that can develop is something called habituation. So habituation is an unnatural behavior to a repeated stimuli. So with food constantly going into the water every day at a specific time, the sharks can become very habituated. So initially they'll be attracted to the area, and then they'll kind of just like stay in the area. And even though there's humans around, they're just not going to care. They're going to stay in that area because they know that there's food there. And I always like to show everyone how, like, just emphasize again the why. Why are we looking at tourism and sharks, and why do we really care? And it's like I said, sharks are, not all the animals on the planet are not doing too well right now, and sharks are definitely in trouble. So we've seen a population decline of sharks over the past 50 years. This is a excuse me. This is a graph of the of oceanic sharks decline over the past 50 years. So just a steady slope going down, unfortunately, up to about last year. And I couldn't find a good graphic, but the same thing goes with our reef sharks. The sharks that stay in coral reefs, they're also in global decline. So anything affecting sharks, especially human activity, it's so important for us to investigate this as scientists so we can better help conserve shark populations and help management and everything like that. So with that, I will segue into my research that I did. It was titled Provisioning Tourism with Nurse Sharks in Keekalker, Belize. And I'll just tell you all about the research I did there. It was really fun. I got to stay in Belize for 2 months, about 8.5 weeks. Yeah, about 8.5 weeks. And it was really one of the best times of my life. And I learned some really cool stuff, and I got a lot of really cool research done. So my study species for this project was the nurse shark, scientific name, Ginglymostoma serratum. Nurse sharks are one of the most underrated sharks in the shark world because they're so popular to see around like coral reefs, especially here in Florida, all around the Caribbean. There's like always nurse sharks. They are listed as data deficient and in like slow decline on the IUCN Red List. So they're not endangered, but they are they're threatened. They're in the threatened category, which means that their populations aren't like horrible, but we don't really know what their populations are doing. They're slightly going down. Nurse sharks are a special type of shark. They are bottom dwellers. They lay on the bottom. They're always found sleeping under coral reefs. They also have the reputation of being very lazy. As you can see in all these pictures, these nurse sharks are like not moving, barely. So they like to stick their heads under corals and take a nap during the day because they are nocturnal. So they're nocturnal sharks. They're very active at night and they're always found sleeping during the day. And if anyone's wondering like, oh, how can this shark just lay at the bottom and, you know, still be able to breathe? Because I'm sure a lot of people have heard, you know, sharks have to keep swimming in order to breathe. Well, that's not true with all sharks. And that's especially not true with the nurse shark because they have a special way of breathing that they also use for eating. It's called bugle pumping. And it's when they use their cheek muscles to suck water in their mouth and they pass it through their gills. And that's how they can sit on the bottom and breathe. They also use that to eat. So one reason they're called nurse sharks, this is still debated in the scientific world, but one reason they're called nurse sharks is because of that powerful suction that they have. When they're near the surface and they're eating food, they make this really loud popping noise with their cheeks. So it's a very loud and very strong suction. So it really can break up all of its favorite food. So the area that I did my study in was called Sharkray Village. It's a provisioning site right here. So Keekalker is the island that I was on. That's this tiny little island right here next to Belize. And yeah, it's like a 5-mile long island. They have the Keekalker Marine Reserve, which is all of the water surrounding Keekalker. And it has a variety of marine habitats. Whoops. There we go. Right here is the Belize Barrier Reef, which is part of the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, which is the second largest barrier reef in the world, second to the Great Barrier Reef. So it was a really cool site. So the overall objective of my project was to figure out if provisioning tourism affected the behavior of nurse sharks. I had a lot of different questions, like was it making more sharks come into this area? Are there more sharks here than there are in other areas? But the ones I'm going to focus on for this presentation is looking at swimming behavior and their attraction to boats. So I did a variety of research methods in order to answer these questions. One of the methods I used was setting up a camera right in Sharkray Village. Usually what we use for this is something called a baited remote underwater video. And usually there's like a bait box attached to the camera and you set the camera down and let the sharks do their thing. But in this specific area, it had been, Sharkray Village is a tourism area, which means they feed the sharks there. So if I was to put a bait box in a place where sharks are being fed, I don't think I would have a camera anymore, basically. So I just had a GoPro on a regular tripod with some weights at it at the bottom of the site, which was like 6 feet. The site was very shallow water. So yeah, so that camera basically was looking at the abundance of nurse sharks in the area. I also set the camera up before any boats arrived to the area to see how many nurse sharks came into view as soon as a boat started pulling up, to see like where they're coming from. Are they just coming because the boats are coming? Like what's going on? Hello. And I also looked at the biggest part of my project was looking at the behavior of nurse sharks. So I was looking at mostly swimming behavior. So I looked at different ways the nurse sharks were swimming. So there's just different behaviors that you can point out when it comes to swimming. And yeah, I video recorded every single session and had to go back and review a lot of video in order to pick out certain behaviors. I also wrote down some behaviors in a dive slate. That's what you see me doing right here. Yes, that is me right there. In the dive slate, it was kind of like a secondary way of me taking data, just in person looking, taking down data, and going back to review the video, comparing my data and making sure everything was correct. So yeah, this is Shark Ray Village. This was mainly what we saw every time we went there. Yeah, every time we went there, there were tons of nurse sharks. It was probably the most amount of nurse sharks I've ever seen in my life, and like maybe I'll ever see, unless I ever go back to Belize, to that area. But yeah, the boats would come up, just like this little video going down here. Boats would come up and park. And then off the side of the boat, the tour guides would throw fish in the water, and the sharks would eat it. You can see them, I think as it rolls through again, you can see them kind of like slurping it up. That's them using that bugle pumping. You can also see that these guys have little barbels on their faces. They're like little mustache, and it helps them feel their food when it's under the sand. So, but yeah, these are my nurse sharks. There were also stingrays there being fed, hence the name Shark Ray Village. Southern stingrays were also being fed there. So some of the interactions that I was looking at was definitely the shark and human interactions. So how were the sharks interacting with the humans? Were they bothered by our presence? Were they just ignoring us? Were they scared of us? And as you can see in this little video, this shark was not very scared of me at all. It's kind of cute, honestly. I was like, this is the best thing that's happened to me in that moment. But yeah, so this shark is kind of just laying on my fin, most likely just thinking I have some food and waiting for food. So this was not a very common behavior we saw, but the sharks definitely didn't really mind that humans were around. The only thing that you couldn't really do to the sharks was reach out to touch them, which one, we don't touch sharks in the wild. And two, they sometimes the tour guides were not very, they weren't regulating the tourists as much. So sometimes the tourists would go out and try to touch the sharks, but the sharks usually, if they weren't feeding, the sharks would just swim away, like, no, that's too close. Another behavior, this is kind of blurry. I don't know if you guys could really see it, but basically this is the interaction between two sharks. They were kind of having a little heated discussion, I guess, about some food, but they're kind of really going at it. And this was kind of a aggression behavior that we saw sometimes between sharks. Sometimes we'd see it between the stingrays too. The sharks were not very nice to the stingrays at all. Like, they were just not nice. But the stingrays always got the scraps at the bottom, so the stingrays were kind of just like second to the sharks. And another thing I looked at was the attraction to the boats. So as you can see, all of these sharks, that's like, there's probably like over 20 nurse sharks in this video, but all of them were at that boat at the beginning. Yep, we're at that boat feeding. But as soon as that boat stopped feeding them and another boat came in, these sharks just made a beeline straight for that other boat, basically saying, do you have any more food for us? So they would kind of just go from boat to boat, figuring out or looking to see if anyone's got food for them. So they were very attracted to these boats. So this is probably my favorite video showing how these sharks are attracted to the boat. So they're following the boat like little puppy dogs. And it's very interesting because the sharks, I've learned that this site has been a provisioning site for a really long time, and about 15 years. And the sharks have basically learned that that boat engine means dinner bell. So we're going to follow the dinner bell and see where it takes us. So this is just a perfect representation of how attracted these sharks were to boats and that boat engine sound. So some of the findings, some of my findings and conclusions were these sharks clearly were modifying their natural behavior to gain access to this very important resource to them, which is food. Because like I said earlier, all sharks' brains are telling them to do is reproduce, feed, and like move around sometimes. So feeding and food is right at the top of that list. And like I said earlier, nurse sharks are nocturnal, so they're usually very active at night and just resting throughout the whole day. But here at Shark Ray Village, they were doing the complete opposite. They were being very active during the day, eating, moving around, swimming around a lot. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to see what they were doing at night. I couldn't put any cameras out there, but we assume that they might not be as active at night. But all of this kind of goes into energy reserves and like metabolic energy use. So nurse sharks have a very low metabolic rate because they are very, like I said, they're lazy sharks. They're always laying around, sleeping around. They don't really need a very high metabolism to do much because they also don't migrate. They kind of, the most I think nurse shark they've seen a nurse shark migrate is like 75 miles or something like that. So nurse sharks, they like to stay in one place and not move a lot. Like that reef is their home, and they just make that same reef their home. But yeah, so because of all of this energy that these nurse sharks are using during the day, it's just, you know, we wonder, are they getting enough food to maintain that energy throughout the day and at night, since they're supposed to be active at night? Or are they literally just doing the complete opposite? Are they only active during the day and they sleep at night? So those are more questions. And just love being a scientist, you usually ask more questions after you answer a question. But that's definitely one thing that I would like to look more into the future. But yeah, and another one is that they've definitely developed a learned behavior. I think I said this earlier, but Shark Ray Village has been Shark Ray Village for about 15 years now. It actually might be more at this point, almost 20 years. And because of that, these sharks have had a long time to learn that food comes to this specific place in between these times, and we should probably be around for that. And because of that, they literally sit at the entrance of Shark Ray Village and wait for boats to come in the morning. And I physically observed this one time. We were just like, where are these sharks coming from? Like there's 30 of them, but when we get there, there's nothing. So one day I decided to like just swim out and figure out like, oh, I wonder where they're going. I followed one shark, and then one shark turned into like 30 sharks just sitting on the bottom of the seagrass at the entrance of Shark Ray Village. So they literally were just sitting there waiting for all the boats to come. This was when there were no boats in the area, but like I said, they knew that boats were coming to that area. And they're smart. They know food's coming. And the last thing was that the attraction to the boats unfortunately led to some consequences that I'll go into. So these sharks were, some of these sharks were being hit by the boat propellers from the boat. So you can see in this very top picture, the fins on the shark have a lot of nick marks, and we saw a lot of sharks with those types of marks on their dorsal fins. And we also saw this shark right here that had some wounds that looked more like propeller wounds than they would like bite marks, because sometimes the sharks can bite each other, but these specific wounds were more associated with boat propeller. And there's a way that we can mitigate this through management, and that is putting boat propeller guards on their propellers. And you know, some whale watching boats do this because some whales can get hit by whale watching boats, but some of those boats actually put covers on their propellers that won't make them sharp, so they won't cut the animal while they're spinning. Another thing is that all of the tour guide boats would feed off the right side of the boat, kind of near the propellers. So the sharks always knew to go to the right side of the boat. I'm not sure why the tour guides do that, but it could be a way to make sure, like, you know, that we know the sharks are going to come on this side of the boat. But because of that, the sharks are just getting very close to that boat propeller. And again, that boat propeller noise, that boat engine, it's screaming dinner bell to them, and it's screaming food. So they're going to want to get to that source as close as possible. So these were just some of the consequences that I saw from how attracted they were to these boats. Oh. So I like to ask this question at the end: is tourism good or is tourism bad? And a lot of people ask me this question, and really the only answer is that it depends on the management. And some people don't like that answer, but it's the real and really the only answer. So good management means we'll have a safer environment for the animals, the habitat they live in, and for the humans, because we have to make sure it's safe for the humans before we make sure it's safe for the sharks. But yeah, so like I said earlier, putting boat propeller guards on the propellers can mitigate that, can mitigate sharks from getting hit by the boat propellers. Another way is just changing what side of the boat that they feed off of, what the tour guides throw their food off of. And maybe the sharks won't get as close to the boat propeller, as close to the boat propellers. So with good management, you can have good tourism. And there is a way to know if a tourism like company is good or bad for the environment, because they usually have a sticker that says like eco-friendly. So if you are going to the Caribbean or any like place where they do shark tourism and you want to go on one of their shark tours, it's really important to go on TripAdvisor and make sure they have that sticker that says eco-friendly, because that means that that specific company is making sure that what they're doing for the tourists is also safe for the animals and the environment. So good thing to look out for. And then we've got our bad management. If we have bad management, it means we're going to have harmful things happening to the habitats and to the animals, specifically the sharks. So bad management means we're not, the fisheries department might not be, you know, patrolling the area during tourism, during the tourism times. They might not be checking and making sure, you know, tour guides are doing the right thing. I definitely saw a lot of bad management in Kikalker. You know, the nurse sharks there are a protected species, and they're protected, surprise, only because of tourism. And technically, you know, since they're protected, you're not allowed to like touch the animals, take them out of the water. But unfortunately, we did see a lot of that in this area. And that was simply because it was not managed very well at all. So just making sure that, like I said, those tour guide companies have that eco-friendly sticker on it is really important when you're doing trips like this. So that is really the conclusion of my presentation, and I really hope that you all enjoyed it. And I always like to put my social media handles and the Miss handles here as well. So if you guys have any questions or want to reach out about anything, you can find me at any of these handles, at Carlee MJ _ for Instagram and Twitter. My email is cjax90@fau.edu. And then you can find Minorities in Shark Sciences on misselasmo.org. And our social media is at miss_Elasmo. So with that, we can get into some questions. My honestly favorite part of the presentation is answering questions.
So if anyone has, there's no questions in the chat right now, but if anyone has questions, you're welcome to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
So hi. This isn't really a question, it's more of a clarification. When you said that the sharks are like at the waiting at like the entrance for boats, it doesn't it sounds like they're more like waiting just for the food, which means it's possible that tourism and feeding the sharks could be restricting them from getting their own food.
Yes, so that is something that I want to look at in the future, looking to see what these sharks are eating in comparison to what they're eating from the tour guides. So sometimes, the sharks, I'm sure that they still have their instinct and that they can go and get their own food, but sharks like to conserve energy, and the less energy that they use, the better for them. So the easiest food source for these sharks is the boats bringing them food, because they literally, it's just like if you're sitting in bed and someone comes and brings you like breakfast in bed. You don't have to get up and make breakfast. So the same thing with these sharks. So it is pretty much preventing them from getting their own food because they just know it's an easy food source. I hope that clarified things for you.
Yeah.
Sweet.
What other aspects of behavior is impacted by this?
So the other swimming behaviors that I saw, so sometimes nurse sharks do what we call milling, which is just swimming in circles. And these sharks were doing a lot of that in this area, especially when there's food around. And that's a very high energy behavior. And again, that just all goes into energy reserves and how much energy is actually, or how much energy do they have left for important things like reproducing, being able to, go to the mating grounds, wherever those are. And again, like feeding, like, do they even feed themselves? But so most of the swimming behaviors I looked at were very like high energy versus low energy. And in this area, they definitely were using more high energy swimming behaviors. So again, just goes into, hopefully, we hope that they have energy left for these very important things that they need to do, but yeah.
So we do have a question in the chat. Catherine is wondering, how are the tour boats regulated and checked on?
So it depends on the area. So in Kikalker, the fisheries management would occasionally come through and just kind of drive through the area. And honestly, I only saw them do that when there were very few boats there. And they kind of just drive through. It depends on the country, because this is a very, very tiny, tiny island. And what they do really isn't like, they don't do as much management as I think that they could or that they should. But also there's not a ton to manage. But yeah, with that specific area, they would come through and just kind of, drive around and make sure no one had like a nurse shark on their boat. That's the biggest thing that they were looking for, is making sure no one was taking the nurse sharks, because they were 15 years ago, they were hunting nurse sharks and using their skin and using their meat. And that's actually one reason why they became protected for tourism, was because a lot of tourists said, oh, we want to see the nurse sharks, but we don't want to see them get killed. So someone needs to change this. So Belize decided to protect nurse sharks, kind of to save themselves as well, because that's a lot of money going towards them, towards their economy. So yeah, really the only thing they're looking for was making sure no one was taking the sharks. In other places, they, depending on the rules, they'll make sure no one's feeding the sharks. It's almost like a police patrol type thing. Here in Florida, it's called FWC, but other places might be called different things, but there usually are fisheries management organizations that will go around and make sure all tourism activities are going the way they're supposed to.
We did have another question come into the chat from David. I think he joined us a little bit later, but he's asking, are the sharks attracted to the sound of the boats or the sight and shape of the boat shadow?
The boats. What do you mean the boats?
Yes. So the sharks were attracted to the sound of the boats. So nurse sharks in particular, they have very tiny eyes, but they have a very keen sense of hearing, smell, and what's the other one? Their lateral line. So along their body, they can feel vibrations in the water. They can also sense magnetic fields. And the boat is basically giving off all the right signs for them that like prey would give to these sharks. So nurse sharks, when they're hunting, since they can't see very well, they're just using their sound and their other senses to figure out, is there food in the area. With the boat engine, it's a sound, and it's a very low frequency sound that sometimes their prey makes. And and they can't see food unless it's like right up in their face because of their small eyes. So basically the boat is like the perfect thing to attract a nurse shark because they hear that engine noise, they know that food is coming. So it's all just like working with their hunting senses, and they're just like, yep, we know that food's gonna get here and I don't have to do any work. So yes, they are attracted to that boat sound, the engine noise. And sometimes the tour guides would actually, like if there weren't a lot of sharks around and they stopped feeding and they had turned their boat engine off, they'll turn their boat engine back on and like rev the boat a little bit just to get nurse sharks to come around, because that's how attracted to the boat engine noise they were.
Did you notice in your research whether there was an effect on other species that the sharks would normally feed on?
So I did not notice that in my research. That is something that's on my list of things that I want to continue to research, just kind of get a good visual or just like a biodiversity population of that surrounding area. Like how diverse are the animals there? Are there a lot of its prey items? Because nurse sharks feed on lobsters, conch, crabs, and hard-shelled things like that. Just looking to see, how abundant those are in that area is a good way to tell if they're, eating them. But also the stingrays in that area, they were definitely very affected. I'd say, honestly, the stingrays they looked a little worse than the sharks because they get a little, they're not as hardy as sharks for one. And like I said, they would always get the scraps at the bottom. And sometimes their sharks were not very nice to them. Yeah, so that was the only direct thing that I could see this activity like affecting something that wasn't the nurse shark. It was really just the stingrays, but I'm also interested to see if it's affecting the diversity of the animals around them.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to unmute if you do. Yeah, I think that might be it, Carlee.
Sweet.
Well, I guess we'll go ahead. We're just a few minutes early, really, so we will go ahead and finish up. Thank you so much for coming and for this great presentation. It was super informative. I personally really loved it and found it very interesting. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. Thanks to everybody that joined us. And yeah, thanks again. Have a great evening.
Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed.
Thank you.
Bye.